Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first ever installment of Intersect Conversations at Fractal. I will be your host for today. Just a few quick housekeeping things. While we are in this conversation, if you are watching this offline or after the conversation is over, please feel free to reach out to us at intersect at fractal.ai or continue the conversation at the ai.fractal community on Microsoft Teams. The idea today is to sort of bring together several different ways that we can look at a problem from the lens of AI engineering and design. So let me kick things off with a quick quote, which is the topic that we're going to discuss today is how do we build an ethical AI within the context of GPT-3 or essentially similarly powerful general intelligence, which might come in the near future.
Before going to GPT-3, I think Akhil anyway covered a bit about this. GPT-3 is a model released by OpenAI. I thought it would be very interesting to put out here the mission statement of OpenAI, where they explicitly talk about helping build a AGI system, which of course they define as a system that can compete with humans on economically valuable work. So a pretty interesting thing for a company to explicitly state out building AGI in its mission statement. I think this might be the only one that I'm aware of where someone is attempting to build AGI, and getting to AGI is a real big deal. A quick thought experiment before going to the next slide is. OpenAI, one of the co-founders is Elon Musk, who also, among many other things, set up SpaceX. And they have a very outrageous claim or ambition, right, about setting up a human colony on Mars before in his lifetime, right, basically, where Elon Musk gets to visit that colony. A simple thought experiment would be which of these two aims are more outrageous. I would say building a AGI would be much more far-fetched. But what the Google paper that came about 3 years back absolutely revolutionized things by absolutely moving the attention network to a very scalable mode of operation. So the paper that Google introduced 3 years back is even called that attention is all you need. And the basic thesis of this paper was about building an architecture which devoid of looking at sentences in near proximity, right, words in near proximity, to build a network absolutely based on multiple attention nodes. And this transformer architecture is a it's a representational learning, right? Rather than learning sentences, it is about learning the representations that these sentences exhibit. It's a classical unsupervised way of learning, and a classically scalable way of learning, because it allows your models, your training to scale, because you could train multiple sentences at one particular time. So this is what a multitask model does, right? A multitask model is basically a single model that can understand multiple languages and do multiple tasks in multiple languages, right? So here you see a simple transformer model, a transformer-based model that Fractal has, where you can talk in Marathi, Russian, do sentiments across languages. Sentiment is a classic step in NLP, right? So can you accomplish this task in English or Spanish or Chinese, right? This has been a very difficult problem till maybe 2 or 3 years back. And with the advent of transformer architecture, here you can see, right, we have a multitask, multilingual model where you could do many languages, many tasks within the same model architecture.
What does it mean for an AI company, let's say like Fractal? If we have hundreds of models which are deployed across several projects, right? So how do we ensure that all of these models are adhering to certain core values that we have or our client has? For example, it should not be biased by gender or race, or it should not go against human dignity and things like that. Right? So how do we ensure that? So how do we engineer for that is going to be the theme of my talk. So first, the requirement is, and if my job was on the line, I would think like this. I would say that I need to have a single pane of view for all AI work. I should have an AI charter or bill of rights that applies to all AI deliverables. And for each AI project, I would want model versioning to travel back in time. If let's say just like an infosec incident, right? If there is a report of an AI model having a bias or misbehaving, I should be able to go back to the previous model, which is clean. I should have DevOps or CI/CD methods to deploy or change models on the fly on production systems. I should have automated testing, similar to code tests, right? I should be testing for technical performance, analytical performance, and so on. There should be a system where I would request for reviews of model transparency, right? There's peer review, testing of all these biases and so on. Post deployment, how do I monitor this? The performance of my models. All of these things are basics. So first off, right off the bat, and I'm agreeing that technology cannot be the silver bullet, or it can't solve for all of the ethical consequences of AI going performing in ways in which it's not intended. But from this could be the initial steps. That it obviously needs a holistic approach, but the first steps could be around governance. What are the platforms in which these needs to be built, so that even in case an unintended incident occurs, we can quickly recover from it or take corrective action.
And the reason for picking a meme was that my fear doesn't come without fascination, right? I want to stay with this idea of a meme for just another second. And of all the applications, it's GPT-3 has now converted legalese into basic English language. It's made it far more explainable. You've got the fact that it's writing blogs that are trending. It's writing poetry. It's responding to philosophers. And for me, I think the most peculiar and interesting and fascinating application of GPT-3 has been that it can create memes. And the reason that this was mind-boggling to me was that there are so many intangible experiential elements that goes into creating a meme. Now, if you try to explain a meme to someone who has never heard of a meme, it's very, very difficult, right? And so I started to kind of think about, okay, what goes into creating a meme and why is it so special? That someone who's not human is able to do this, right? Memes are contemporary, they're evolving. You never have, something that was relevant 10 years ago being relevant today in the meme culture world. They're obscure. The whole idea with a meme is that it's peculiar, it's, kind of out there, and yet it's relatable to pretty much everyone in the world. That's the whole idea of it, that it creates that sense of resonance. It's familiar, so it takes like a song or a political figure or an actor, and then it gives you a new association. Here it's breakfast and Hotline Bling by Drake is what's represented there. And then it's riding on a wave, it's exaggerating a point, and that's a very human behavior, right? And that's why to me this was one particularly interesting example. So why are we afraid, right? What is it? And so I spent the last couple of weeks exploring my own fear with it. And it is that I realized that AI seems to understand me and us in the way that it now communicates in memes, that it can write poetry, that it can, it's able to catch us in our biases. It's able to beat us at games that we have spent years learning. It's able to recognize our potential and our limits in more ways than one, but we don't understand it back, right? And I think that is where our fear comes from. So if fear is the problem, I started to wonder if ethics are the answer, or are ethics the excuse that we might use as human beings to kind of curtail the potential of what AI can do because we are too afraid, right? And if fear is the problem, then maybe what we need to design as practitioners, what we need to do engineering, what we need to be solving for is the idea of trust. And that is where I kind of ended up with this, that to design AI means to design it to make it comprehensible, right? To make it comprehensible for a person who is engaging with it, for a person who is designing it. So taking that whole space of black boxness where we currently need to govern it and put ethics onto it because, it is so fearful, it is magical, there is a mystique to it. We always expect it to be objective and accurate, but at the same time, we never give it room to fail, right? Can we design for failure in the way that we set up systems so that there is some learning room, there's some breathing room for the machines that we are working with, right? Can we, currently it is invisible, there is a fear of deception all the time when you're engaging with AI. Can we make it something that causes us to be more reflective? And that's why I think the idea of governed by ethics versus ethical AI, an AI that could make us more ethical as well, is something that I thought was a really interesting direction that acknowledges and designs for human irrationality.
Anybody who wants to start the point of view on how much can we actually trust the innovators to regulate themselves? We have examples of things like Clearview AI. Silicon Valley by itself has always had the tradition of, launch the next best, biggest thing without worrying too much about what's the impact of it on the society. As a race, we've created things like, genetic engineering, human cloning, nuclear arms that we created first and then grappled with what are the implications of this. So how much do we really believe that we'll be able to regulate ourselves this time?
As human beings, we don't have a shared ethical moral code globally. And everything AI kind of surpasses boundaries, right? So if you're talking about a governance, like Gokul was mentioning, maybe localized governance for AI won't work. And we do need something a little broader. And potentially, I do agree that I think it would have to come from people who are not incentivized monetarily to exploit. And you cannot take capitalism out of capitalists. So I doubt that innovators would be the ones to bring ethics to the table.
He understands the instinct of fear that we don't understand AI, but is this fear valid? Because his question is it really that we don't understand AI, or is it that only very small set of people who are innovating on the edge understand AI? I think we are on a continuum of how much we understand, right? And as we move more and more towards general intelligence, we're going to move more and more towards the continuum towards what we don't understand, right? If you think about what GPT is doing, if you look at all of its applications, what we don't know is which questions can GPT-3 do well at, right? And how well. When we start thinking about applications, we don't have a way of, so let's compare it to a software engineering paradigm, right? In software engineering, we've put together a whole infrastructure of test-driven development, making sure that we understand what the outputs are in each situation. And when we don't understand something, we can open up the code and audit it to make sure that there's no foul play and everything checks out. When we get to something like GPT-3, when you start reaching levels of problem solving, where the problem representation itself is not controlled by the designer, you have reached a place where you don't really understand what's going on. One way of thinking about it is the argument of take a logical argument to its extreme, right? Let's imagine a general intelligence which is as capable as human beings. And then you get into the question of how much do we really understand how human beings work, right? So the more we move towards general intelligence, the more we're moving away from comprehensibility. And I think that's an important question to think about. Bhushan's comment was ethics are a product of power and authority. Whoever holds the power decides the law. And then SN has this question of if GPT-3 is being controlled by some of the select few, do they get too much power in this closed tech world, right? And I think an almost a corollary to that question could be, is there a need for taking this power away from private investment, right? So any comments on should something this powerful be allowed to be controlled by private incentives?
So let me take that question, Akhil. It's very interesting. So this is natural, right? Suraj just mentioned that training this took the infrastructure cost itself was around $10 million, right? So it is quite natural that unless something like a Wikipedia effort happens and this is made free of cost and works on donations, I don't know whether that model can be replicated for AI systems, but unless such a thing happens, this necessarily will be in the hands of the select few. The alternative is the question that, let us pose it the other way around. Should this be in the hands of private corporations? Look at the alternative. The alternative is more dangerous, where if it is to be funded by governments, right, largely for military applications and so on, then all of this ethics doesn't apply at all. So in such cases, when it comes to military applications, everything is fair, right? All is fair in war. So they might go to any extent. So there's no really easy answer to this question.
There's also a precedent, though. If you look in the world of medicine, we have laws which allow medicines to become, there is a patent, but only for a certain time. And after that, it comes in the public domain, right? So there is precedent for the human race to have solved these kind of tricky questions. Is there something that we can think about in the AI space? There are questions like, for example, some things that Shivani raised very well is we don't have a framework for owning facts. If you take it one step further, we don't have a framework for owning intelligence. And if you look at existing intelligence, human beings have not had a very good track record of owning intelligence. The way we treat animals, the way we have treated other fellow human beings in the past, we've not done a great job of treating other intelligent beings around us. And we've always made excuses to allow ourselves to mistreat them, right? And according to what Shivani said, I think that's a really good point, that thinking about artificial general intelligence and how we're going to build an ethical framework around it gives humanity an opportunity to look at these arguments again and figure out how can we become a more ethical race overall. And if it is the fear of not what we don't understand, then maybe one thing that we can use as a way to manage that fear is that when we look at the most powerful general intelligence on this planet, which is other human beings, we don't understand them. But we have solved the problem of working with them, even though we cannot read their minds. We have solved the problem of how do we cooperate and how do we build bigger and better things together. We will need to solve that problem again. We will need to grapple with questions of, do we give general intelligence personhood? Do we have to have values like mercy and compassion towards an intelligence that we might create on our own and so on? So I think there's a lot more ground that we need to cover, and GPT-3 is just sort of just a spark that has lit up this entire debate.